me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to the Draft Prospects One-on-One Series, your guide to some of the biggest and hottest names in the 2024 NFL Draft. We're talking quarterbacks, and this next quarterback pushed me to my limits as an evaluator, right? So I've been doing this over a decade, and this is probably the toughest evaluation I've had to do because it forced me to remove my human bias out of the equation. And you hear it all the time when people say, don't scout the helmet, scout the player, et cetera, et cetera. You do your best as an evaluator or someone that is watching a player, right? I don't even consider myself an evaluator. I'm a fan, but I do take this seriously, and I do try to do my best to remove any bias when I'm looking at a player. It was very hard, I will say, with this particular draft class because of COVID and the extra eligibility that a lot of these players have been afforded. And a lot of these guys, if you take a look at the quarterback class, you're talking about probably a good chunk of the guys that we're going to talk about in this 2024 NFL draft at the quarterback position having transferred and playing their best football, which is what you want, at the end of their careers with the last team that they ended up playing for. So you have to be able to erase some of the prior mistakes and bad football that you may have witnessed with these prospects. And that's sometimes tough to do. Specifically with a guy like Bo Nix, I had already written him off. I had seen enough Bo Nix at Auburn. It wasn't pretty. When the competition was ramped up, he played his worst football, and it showed against teams like Georgia and Alabama and Tennessee and Florida. He beat up on the little sisters of the poor, but when it came to those big-time programs, he always shrunk in those situations. And then, to take it a step further, he transfers over to Oregon, and its very first game, big stage, primetime matchup, number one team in the nation, Georgia Bulldogs, he goes out and he wets the bed, throws 2 picks, the second of which was just an egregious back-breaking pick 6 that reminded me so much of Bo Nix at Auburn. I wanted nothing to do with him. And so to see his transformation, to watch him throw 45 touchdown passes and only, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever interceptions this year, and to do the things that he did and literally just be 2 games against Washington away from potentially playing in a national championship or at least making it to the playoffs. It speaks volumes to the transformation that he's undergone. But it took a lot for me to get to a place where I was comfortable enough allowing Bo Nix to just be Bo Nix at Oregon, right? So let's get into Bo Nix. I've talked enough already about Bo Nix and the journey that he's gone through and the mental gymnastics I had to play to get to a position where I could evaluate him fairly and not hold his past transgressions at Auburn against him. So let's get to Bo Nix and talk about what Bo Nix brings to the table. 6'2", 215. As I mentioned, it wasn't great at Auburn, and I'll throw a couple numbers at you. His first season at Auburn, 57.6 completion percentage. Okay, now he did go 9-4 that year as a starter, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, but the yards per attempt 6.7. That's gross. The 57.6 completion percentage is nasty, but again, 9-4. There was hope for Bo, and that was his first year. You go to the next year in 2020, 59.9% completion percentage, so essentially 60%. Not the massive jump you would like to see in year 2, but fine. 12-7 in terms of touchdown to interceptions, so that is a decrease in that statistical category. 6-5, the record was not better than the year prior as a freshman. His biggest win, you could argue, in his entire collegiate career came in his freshman year against Alabama, something he would not do again in his career. But his last year in Auburn was one that he talked about really losing, not necessarily the love and the passion for football, but being miserable. He said that the coach that was there that year really made him not be able to stay in a place that he envisioned himself being in at all along. This is a guy that grew up in that area of the country in Alabama. He never envisioned playing anywhere else and leaving the state of Alabama, but he just couldn't envision himself playing under that coach any longer. And so he transfers over to Oregon, lights it up his first year, 71% completion percentage, 71.9 to be exact. So almost 72%, far cry from the 61%, which was his last year at Auburn. Set a career high across the board in every statistical category, including attempts, completions, completion percentages I just mentioned, yards, 3,593 his first year at Oregon. His previous high was 2,542 in his freshman year, again, at Auburn. So 8.8 yards per attempt, way higher than the 7.1 his final year at Auburn, which was his highest at that point of his career. So a full 1.7 yards per attempt more, which is asinine. It's crazy. And then the 29 touchdown passes was the most in his career. You could pretty much total his first 3 years, and they barely cleared his first year in Oregon. His first 3 years combined at Auburn, he had 39 touchdowns. He had 29 alone in his first year at Oregon, and the 7 interceptions, a really solid number. You're talking 4-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. He had never come anywhere. I shouldn't say remotely close, because he was 11/3 in his final year at Auburn. So he was close to 4-to-1 touchdown interception. He went 10-3 his first year in Oregon, and then his last year, obviously 2023, he just goes bananas. Sets the NCAA record for completion percentage in a single season at 77.4. The previous mark was 77.2 by Mac Jones, so he cleared that. 4,508 yards, his first time eclipsing 4,000 yards in his career, and besting his best total by over 1,000 yards, or roughly 1,000 yards. 9.6 yards per attempt, which is crazy, almost up over 10 yards per attempt. And then 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, as I talked about at the top of the show. Ridiculous. 12-2. The only 2 losses coming to Washington, the team that eventually played for the national championship. So he was outstanding. Also, you factor in his rush statistics. He's a guy that can run. It's not a huge part of his game, but if you sleep on him, he will use his legs to create things, not just with his arms, but also with his legs, and pick up yards that way. He's got 38 career touchdowns at Oregon over his 2-year span there, 20 total rushing touchdowns, over 700 yards rushing, 744 to be exact, and had a 100-yard performance back in 2022 on the ground in one particular game. So very capable on the ground if you fall asleep behind the wheel against Bo Nix. So let's get to what makes Bo Nix an intriguing prospect at the quarterback position in this upcoming draft by looking at his pros. So we start with above average arm talent. This is a guy that can sling the football everywhere that it needs to go on the field. I wouldn't say that he has BTAT, which is big time arm talent, but whatever that next tier is underneath that, that's where he probably resides. And so I got no issues with his arm talent. He can get the football wherever it needs to go. Good athleticism, as I talked about. He is a threat to run. He is a dual threat quarterback, a guy that can, make it happen with his legs. When things break down, he can extend to throw, but he can also extend to run and be a difference maker in that regard as well. He's also a guy you have to defend in the red zone as a runner, as he can, as I talked about already, get the football into the end zone. 20 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 seasons while at Oregon. Quick operation. I just love his footwork. I love the way that he's always in a ready to throw posture. So the operation is always quick. He's got a quick release. The ball comes out fairly quickly. And so there's a lot of things to like there when you're talking about Bo Nix. Can extend plays, both the run and pass. I've talked about that already. He's a guy that will extend plays when things break down. He will go and make it happen with his legs. He will find that little crevice in the B gap to escape to get up the field, and he's a very adept slider, so he's not going to take a bunch of big shots. The minute that physical contact is imminent, he's going to slide, and he's not going to risk taking a shot. I love that about him. He's going to protect himself at all times, but he can extend plays both as a runner and as a passer. Use his touch effectively when necessary. That's one of the traits that you often see missing from a lot of collegiate quarterbacks coming to the next level is they don't put touch on the football when it is necessary, especially when you're throwing over the middle of the football field. Touch is usually required on a lot of those seam throws where there's defenders that you have to clear, getting it over their head, but not putting too much sauce on it. You don't want to throw it right to the safety, so you've got to put a little bit of air and touch on it. He's very good at getting that done. There was a nice little wheel route up the sideline, a defender trailing in pursuit, and he throws it right over, layers it right over that linebacker's head to the tight end in stride. You can't do it any better. He does a great job of using touch effectively when it is necessary. Gorgeous deep ball capabilities. I really fell in love with his deep ball. Watching his tape, it goes to show you that there's a lot of talent here with Bo Nix. And if you can get past some of the things that troubled him in his prior stop at Auburn, and you can dig into what he was able to do. And there's a lot of things that still bother you when you watch the tape, especially the quick pass game. We'll get into that. There's a lot of things that probably don't, sit well with you if you watch a ton of this stuff in regards to Bo Nix. But, when there's an opportunity for a shot down the field, he gives his guys opportunities, and there's a lot of air on these footballs. So these guys have opportunities to run under the football and make plays. You don't average, 9 and some change yards per attempt, almost 10 yards per attempt on just, nickel and dimers. But there are a lot of those, and if you hit enough of those and a couple of those break, they're going to help your average be hardy as well. But you also have to hit your shots down the field, and you see Bo Nix do that quite often within the structure of this Oregon offense. Protects the Duke. I don't have to really spell this out for you. The guy had 45 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions this year, and he didn't have a single fumble at all. Not fumbles lost. He didn't fumble at all, not a single time. So literally, he was only responsible for 3 turnovers this year, but he was also responsible for 51 touchdowns, 6 on the ground, and 45 as a passer. So he's protecting the Duke. And that's something that he didn't necessarily do the best job of when he was at Auburn. And a lot of times his mistakes would be at the most inopportune times. Not that there's ever a good time for a mistake, but his mistakes would come at some of the worst times. So him taking care of the football is something that was mandatory. Seeing him do that was very refreshing. Hopefully that's something that will continue for him moving forward. His 2 superpowers, as you can see, I have the things highlighted in red that I think are his superpowers. His growth and maturation. I talked about this evaluation being tough for me in particular because of what he was at Auburn and the disaster that was some of those big time high profile games that we watched him play in while he was in the SEC. And you see him grow to where he is now at Oregon, how he's able to lead that offense and have them be in ball games. He made some big plays at the end of games. It sucks that Washington game in particular. He takes his team down the field, gets him in the field goal range, and his kicker misses the field goal to tie the game up and send it to overtime. And so he's done a lot of things that you've seen him grow and mature. Mistakes that he would have made when he was at Auburn, not making those same mistakes while at Oregon. Again, some of this could be the offense, and he could be reformed because of the offense he was in. That's one of the questions that you have to ask, right? And it's a very viable question. But there is maturation here. There is growth. He's played a lot of football. Speaking of which, that's the next superpower, is his experience. It's second to none. And when I say that, I literally mean it's second to none. Nobody in college football history has started more games as a starting quarterback than Bo Nix. His 61 1 career starts, an NCAA record for the most starts by a quarterback in NCAA history. Like, that's unprecedented. You don't see a guy start every single game of his collegiate career. He came in as a freshman, started every game at Auburn, started every game while he was at Auburn, started every game at Oregon. He didn't get hurt. His durability is also something that you factor in there because he stayed healthy every single year. 5 years as a starter every single game that he played in. So a magnificent run. That experience, you have to assume, is going to prove to be huge for him at the next level. We've seen this kind of shift in teams really going after quarterbacks with more experience. This isn't the NBA. It doesn't matter that you're coming into the league at 23 or 24 years old. This isn't the NBA where your age matters because of the shelf life of what you want in a player and how you grow and develop those guys. You could come in the league at 24 and play 14 years and be 38 years old, right? Like, that doesn't matter anymore. Teams don't consider that an issue. So you hear people talk about age. Who cares? He started 61 games at the collegiate level. So he's seen a lot. He's experienced a lot. And you would think that a guy like Bo Nix would be able to come in, grab an NFL offense rather quickly, adjust and adapt, and be able to help you sooner rather than later, or sooner than a guy that only started in 22 or 24 collegiate games. So his experience, a huge benefit for him. As we move on to now, the things that give you pause when talking about Bo Nix. Of course, I'm talking about his cons. So first con is he will predetermine decisions pre-snap. And you see that on tape sometimes where you ask yourself, why did you make that throw? Why did you make that decision? And you can tell right away that he was going there the entire time. His head never moves. He's always been locked into that one receiver, and he was going there no matter what. And sometimes it's double coverage, or sometimes he had one-on-one on the other side of the field and never gave it a thought, right? And so sometimes you ask yourself, why did you do that? And you can tell he's reading the field, and he's diagnosing what he thinks is this coverage, and this is the look I'm getting, and this is where I'm going with the football. And he doesn't shift that if it's a different look or it's not what he thought pre-snap. He doesn't go through the progressions. He sometimes locks on and predetermines and makes the throw anyway. All right. The next con is heavily aided by a very simplistic, overemphasized quick game offense. One of the toughest things about the Oregon offense to assess was just the amount of short passes, man. The quick game, the screens and the hitches. And I mean, it was just short pass after short pass after. Like, you see the 77.4% completion percentage, which I talked about earlier, NCAA record. But come on now. If you watch Bo Nix, you know where that 77.4% came from, right? I'd venture to say that over 50 to 60% of his throws, probably even higher, maybe 70% of it, are at or around the line, at or behind the line of scrimmage, right? Like, there was so many, like, there would be games where the first 20 passes of the game are at or behind the line of scrimmage. And you're just saying, and I get it, it's an extension of the run game, et cetera, et cetera. That's cool, but at some point, you've got to stretch the field vertically. You can't throw the football, horizontally all the time. And it seemed like in that offense, they were throwing it short quite a bit. And it's hard to watch. It's hard to stomach that and understand, where do I draw the line? How much of this is Bo Nix? How much of this is the offense that's really aiding and abetting him, right? And then the next con, I think you tie it into what I just was referring to. And this is the biggest deficiency. It's highlighted in red. This is the biggest deficiency I see with Bo Nix right now. Is this, and it's more of a question than it is a statement, right? Is this the new and improved Bo Nix that we watched at Oregon? 45 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 77.4% completion percentage, NCAA record, 12-2, 25-5, or 22-5, over the last 2 years with Oregon. Is this a new and improved Bo Nix? 74 touchdowns against 10 interceptions over the last 2 years. Is he a brand new guy? Has he been reborn? Or is this just the Oregon version of Bo Nix? They coddled him, a lot of short, quick game, made it easy on him, stretched defenses out, made the reads and the throws easy, and he's just a byproduct of playing in this offense. I've long had a bias against Oregon quarterbacks because of the offenses that they've played in. The coaches may change at Oregon, but the concepts seem to stay the same. And look, it's college football, and a lot of this is widespread practice of spreading teams out and trying to create space and matchups. But it seems like they do it even more at Oregon, and they create easier throwing windows at Oregon, and it doesn't always translate to the next level. And so I'm not sure anymore about Bo Nix and whether I'm convinced that he's been reborn, so to speak. And this is a new and improved Bo Nix, and he's grown. And look, players grow, they evolve, they develop. And that could have happened with Bo Nix. Or he could have just been the beneficiary of playing in that Oregon spread offense that allows him to throw into open windows with guys that have athleticism that can win in space and things of that nature. A lot of quick passes, a lot of things to get him into a rhythm. Is this the new Bo Nix? Can I look forward to him taking care of the football, being dynamic and explosive down the field, making plays, being extremely accurate with the football? Or was that just a byproduct of him playing at Oregon? We'll see. And then the last con is his worst games came against the stiffest competition. Now, I will say he didn't play poorly against Washington this year, but they lost both of those games, and Washington ultimately went on to play for a national championship. And he couldn't beat Washington in his entire Oregon career. He went 0-3 versus the Huskies. Okay. I talked about his struggles in the SEC, talked about him having nightmares against teams like Georgia and Florida and, Alabama in particular, beating them once, but, suffering defeats and usually ugly ones at that, oftentimes more so than not. And so when you look at Bo Nix, 7-14 versus ranked opponents in his career, all right, 3-5 at Oregon. So it's not just, him struggling while he was at Auburn. He was 3-5 at Oregon against ranked opponents, including 0-3, as I mentioned, against Washington. So he struggled over the life of his career against ranked opponents. When the teams that he's playing against are really good, he seems to come up short a lot of the time. And it's not just him, obviously, but when you go back and you watch those games, you look at the numbers, you put that whole body of work together, a lot of times he just didn't play well in those games. So that's also something to be mindful of as well. As we transition into his comp, this is a guy that I really truly believe this is a very apt comp for him. Tony Romo, right? And the skill sets are similar. The play styles are similar. Like Romo was a guy that could run, use his legs, didn't really want to, but if he had to, he would slide. Bo Nix does that. Nix is very adept at extending plays and making things happen off schedule. Tony Romo was one of the better quarterbacks to do that during his time of playing. Similar arm strength. Tony Romo had immaculate touch on the football. Same thing can be said for Bo Nix. Similar size quarterbacks, right in that 6'2" and some change range. Similar size in terms of weight. Their play styles are very similar. They look very similar. And then even down to Tony Romo's inability to win the big games, Bo Nix struggles with that as well. So the first guy that came to mind was Tony Romo, and their games are very strikingly similar. So I see him as Tony Romo. And if Bo Nix turns into Tony Romo, you got yourself a hell of a quarterback. And people will sit there and kill Tony Romo for coming up small in big spots. And I've killed Bo Nix for the same thing. But Tony Romo got them to those spots. Tony Romo put them in positions. There were years when the Cowboys were the number one seed. Now, they didn't win when they got to the playoffs. But to get to that point, you need a quarterback with the talent of a Tony Romo. Bo Nix has that skill set, and I think he's a guy that definitely has a chance to be a really good quarterback potentially in this league. Depending on where he lands, obviously it's going to go a long way in determining what he could be. I would love to see him end up somewhere like Denver with Sean Payton. I think that would be a perfect offense for a guy with the skill set of a Bo Nix. My round projection for him, late first to early second. I wouldn't be shocked if someone fell in love with Bo Nix and took him at the back end of the first round. I think he's more so suited to be a second round pick when it's all said and done. But I've said this already, and I'll continue to say this. I think there are going to be, at a bare minimum, 4 quarterbacks taken. Who's that 4th quarterback? Is it J.J. McCarthy? Is it Bo Nix? Right? Is it Michael Penix Jr.? We don't know. 5 could go in the first round. I don't think 5 will, but I wouldn't be shocked if 5 did. Okay? Being that Justin Fields potentially gets traded, I think that takes away one of the teams that may have been willing to spend a first-round pick on a quarterback. But we will see. And Bo Nix will be in that conversation when it is all said and done. I think he's a second-round pick, however. But in any event, that's going to do it for Bo Nix and his 2024 NFL Draft Prospects Series breakdown. He's an intriguing prospect, polarizing for many, including myself. But there are questions that we won't be able to answer until he gets to the league and starts to play football. And that's ultimately what we're going to have to judge him on, right? But we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on the Draft Prospects 101 series. We'll be back to break down more quarterbacks. Look forward to knocking the rest of them down and then moving on to the next position. Until then, I'm your man Louie T signing off. See you guys next time.
LouieTeeNetwork.